Welcome, dreamers, to the realm where time whispers its secrets. Tonight, we embark on a journey not toward harsh truths, but toward shimmering illusions, half-remembered legends, and golden echoes that drift through the jungle mist. This is not merely a tale of conquest or gold, but of yearning, of a dream so powerful it carved paths through forests, rivers, and human hearts. The legend of El Dorado, the Golden One, or perhaps the Golden City that never was. Before we step into the twilight of forgotten empires and glistening if these ancient whispers resonate with your soul, let your presence be known through a gentle like, and join our circle of dreamers by subscribing to continue these nightly journeys into history's hidden realms. Share with us, fellow dreamers, from which corner of the world you're joining tonight's contemplation. Let the global community of history's mysteries connect across time zones as we drift together into the past. Close your eyes. Let the golden mists rise, and follow the faint glimmer of stories once believed. As we begin the long descent into the myth of El Dorado, beneath the thick emerald canopy of the northern Andes, where vines dangle like forgotten thoughts and parrots cry out like echoing dreams, there stirs a whisper. It moves slowly, like mist at dawn, curling around branches, sliding down ancient stones, disappearing into the earth with secrets not meant for daylight. This is not a place for answers. It is a realm of questions. It is the womb of El Dorado. The first travelers who came to these lands did not come with maps or faith, but with hunger. Hunger for gold, for glory, for something that would make them eternal. But before their boots touched mud, before their eyes scanned the treetops, the legend had already been waiting. Older than the colonists, older, perhaps, than memory itself. In the early 16th century, when Spain was stretching its fingers across oceans and empires like a dreamer reaching through sleep, strange tales began to emerge from the mouths of native peoples. They spoke of a man, a king, who bathed in gold dust, who offered treasure to the lake as one might offer prayers. A man whose body shimmered with the sun's reflection, and who lived in a city where gold grew like leaves from every surface. This king, this man of gold, was not merely rich. He was sacred. His name was not El Dorado, it was a role, a ritual, a golden incarnation. The Spanish gave the dream a name, El Dorado. But to the Muisca people of the highlands of what is now Colombia, it was not a place, it was a ceremony. The rite of the Golden Man began at Lake Guatavita, a crater lake, silent and still, wrapped in mist and guarded by forests. Here, they said, the new ruler of the Muisca would stand upon a raft, naked, his skin covered with powdered gold, so fine it shimmered like a second skin of sunlight. Around him nobles would bear treasures, gold figurines, emeralds, carved offerings, and from the raft's center, as drums echoed and flutes wept in the cool air, these offerings would be cast into the lake. The man of gold would plunge into the water, washed clean, born anew. Gold was not wealth to the Muisca. It was sunlight made solid. It was a language of gods, but the Spaniards, trained to see gold as power, could not comprehend this. They heard of a king of gold and saw only a city made from it. They heard of offerings and imagined vaults, and so the myth began to split. One side, rooted in ritual, the other, forged in greed. The jungle, as it always has, watched silently, and in that watching silence, the whisper grew. Even now, Lake Guatavita lies still. On certain mornings, when the mist is thick and the wind is sleeping, you can hear nothing, just the breath of the forest and the quiet call of something lost. Many came to the lake believing it to be the key. They lowered the water level. They dug, they drained, they clawed at the shoreline like time itself was bleeding away. Small figures, glimpses of beauty, long buried. But never the city, never the raft, never the man, because El Dorado was not here. It never was. But the legend did not die. It traveled, like a spirit seeking new flesh. The whisper left Guatavita and slid south, across the Andes, across rivers that bend like serpents. Wherever the Spanish went, El Dorado went too, like a shadow at their side, promising, beckoning, receding. In Quito, they were told the city was deeper in the jungle. In Peru, it was hidden beyond mountains, never crossed. In Venezuela, it glittered behind waterfalls and inside valleys no one returned from. Everywhere, the legend adapted. A city of gold, a temple of light, a lake of treasure, a cave guarded by spirits. El Dorado became what it needed to be. It became the hope that floated in the dreams of those who had nothing else. And the jungle, ever patient, watched them wander. Time passed like slow rain on leaves. Expeditions rose and fell. Men disappeared. Maps were drawn, redrawn, lost, forgotten. And always, the whisper remained. Some say it is the breath of the gold man himself, still dusted in sunlight, calling those who seek meaning and shine. Others say it is the echo of colonial madness, a fever dream that never ended, but deep within the forests, where trees bend from centuries of listening. El Dorado still lives not as a city, but as an idea, a longing, a mirage. The gold was never in the ground. It was in the hearts of those who believed, and the jungle, as it always does, Let them come. Let them dream. Let them disappear. So tonight, we begin not with the arrival of conquistadors, not with a clash of empires or swords drawn in soil. We begin with silence, with mist, with a raft floating on a sacred lake, and a man covered in gold, surrendering himself not to riches, but to ritual. Close your eyes and listen, for the whisper still lingers, and the city still waits not in space, but in story. In the heart of the Andes, where the air is thin and the clouds cling close like whispers of ancestors, lies a lake that glimmers not from the sun alone, but from memory. Lake Wat, cradled by green slopes and swathed in the hush of elevation. It rests like an eye watchful, ancient. Still, it is not large. It is not loud, but it has held more dreams than any palace ever built. The Muisca people, who lived high in these cloud-kissed altitudes, were masterful weavers of both fabric and ritual. Their beliefs threaded the sacred into the everyday. Gold was not a commodity, it was light, frozen, the sweat of the sun, a divine language, and in their cosmology, Lake Guatavita was a threshold, a place where the spirit world brushed gently against the material. Here, at the beginning of a new chieftain's reign, a rite was performed, a ceremony of golden dust and shimmering reverence. It is said that before the sun had fully climbed the peaks, the procession would begin. Villagers gathered in silence. The air held a weight that was not heavy, but priests moved among them, dressed in feathers and beads. Their chants like wind filtered through bone. The new Zephyr ruler was brought forth, naked, vulnerable, yet radiant with solemn strength. His body was coated in fine gold dust, layer by layer, until he no longer resembled a man, but a reflection of the dawn. He became El Hombre Dorado, upon a woven red raft adorned with emeralds, jaguar pelts, and golden totems. He was guided to the lake's center. The waters held their breath. The forest stood still. Then came the offerings, figurines shaped like spirits animals, guardians of realms unseen, all crafted from gold, each one born not from greed, but gratitude. The golden man stood at the raft's heart, a flame amid fog, and with no proclamation, no war cry, only stillness, the lake received him. The gold melted from his skin into the depths. A renewal had begun. The people cheered not for wealth, but for balance, for harmony, for the continued dialogue between sun and soil, sky and self. This was El Dorado, a ritual, not a place, a sacred act, not a structure. Yet when the conquistadors came, they did not see the layers of meaning. They saw only the glint of precious metal in the silt. They heard gold and forgot all else. Their world taught them to measure value not in stories or sanctity, but in ingots and chains. The Muisca, bewildered, explained their customs, their symbols, but the Spaniards were deaf to metaphor. So they drained the lake. In Itemu by Sishawu, Don de Quesada ordered his men to remove the water, to peel away the surface and reach what they thought lay beneath. They carved grooves into the rock, formed bucket lines, worked for months. They found some treasure, yes, but not what they sought. Gold figurines glinting with stylized grace, discs etched with solar motifs, a few emeralds cloudy as memory. The lake, disturbed, began to dry, its silence no longer sacred, but stripped. Then the rains returned, as they always do in stories like these. The lake swallowed their ambitions. The water rose, and with it, the veil. Other expeditions followed. In the late 1500s, the lake was lowered again. Dynamite was used. The mud at the bottom was scraped, sifted, and stared at with desperation. More gold was found, small pieces, echoes of ritual, but no city, no mountain of treasure, no throne cast in sunlight. The real treasure had always been the ceremony, the relationship between man and mystery, between gold and spirit. But the dream had already taken on a different shape. El Dorado was no longer a man of gold. He had become a place, a city gleaming with impossible wealth, a metropolis that defied maps, that defied time. And so the legend unfurled beyond Guatavita, beyond the Andes. It flowed into the veins of every explorer who needed purpose. It whispered to kings in Europe, to outlaws in the colonies, to dreamers who believed that fortune could wash away the weight of fate. And yet, in the highlands, the Muisca remained. Their stories grew quieter, guarded not by swords, but by silence. The lake still shimmered, though fewer came to watch. The rites faded into memory, but not completely. Even now, elders speak of the raft, of the golden man, of the moment when reflection and reality became one. They do not tell these stories to reveal treasure. They tell them to remember balance, to remind us that not all things shining should be possessed, that not all whispers need answers. And in the soft hush of Guatavita's evening, when mist curls low and time folds in on itself, you might still see a glimmer, not of gold, but of understanding, that El Dorado was never lost, because it was never meant to be found. It was meant to be felt, a presence, a pause, a shimmer in the soul. As the Spanish ships kissed the shores of the New World, their hulls groaned not only with cannon and cloth, but with dreams. dreams shaped by tales of kingdoms awash in gold, of streets paved with jewels, of emperors cloaked in wealth beyond imagination. And in this strange new continent, where the air smelled of spice and strange fruits, the dream found soil. It took root. El Dorado. To the conquistadors, it was not a ritual, not a whisper. It was a promise, a prize, and promises, when misunderstood, can drive men to madness. It began with stories carried by trembling lips. Indigenous captives, frightened and pressed beneath the glare of steel, spoke of a golden man, of offerings, of cities that shone even at night. They spoke to delay death, to appease their captors, or simply to survive. The Spaniards, half listening, filled in the rest. The early expeditions, those raw and rusted men like Gonzalo de Quesada followed rivers like they were lines on divine maps. His journey into the interior of modern-day Colombia brought him into contact with the Muisca. The Spaniards, dazzled by the gold ornaments worn not as luxury but as liturgy, assumed they were only at the beginning of something grander. De Quesada heard of Lake Guatavita, of the ceremony, but to him, it was not a renewal. It was a vault. And so he sent men to explore the lake, to scratch its edges, to study it not as sacred, but as secret. When his expedition returned with modest treasure, a glimmer lit behind his eyes. If a small lake could hold such gold, what of the mountains? What of the valleys? What of the heart of the jungle itself? Surely El Dorado must be more, must be elsewhere. Thus began a pattern, a trail of men who walked not with reverence, but with calculation. There was Francisco de Orellana, whose name would eventually cling to the mighty Amazon River. He set forth with Francisco Pizarro. Gonzalo, hoping to find the golden land beyond the Andes. Through jungles that breathed in their footsteps, they sailed and staggered. They saw cities along the riverbanks, real places, thriving societies. But Orellana's eyes were clouded by the myth. He did not seek people. He sought gold, and the gold, ever elusive, dissolved into the mist. As the jungles closed behind them, many never returned. Or if they did, they returned changed, thinner, quieter, their dreams heavier than their packs. Back in Spain, the tallies continued. Court poets, monks, and adventurers spun the legend into silk. El Dorado became a moving target, shifting with every rumor. In each telling, it grew more extravagant. A kingdom, then a city, then an empire. It was never pinned down. Like a spirit, it lived in the breath between rivers, in a gap between mountain peaks, always just out of reach. Yet men kept reaching. Pedro de marched deep into the jungle in 1560, determined to tame it. Alongside him rode Lope de Aguirre, whose name would soon drip with madness. Was careful, measured, but Aguirre burned. His soul seemed already touched by the fever of gold. When hesitated, Aguirre revolted. He killed his commander, claimed control, and declared himself Prince of Peru. He was no longer chasing El Dorado, he believed himself its heir. Madness had blossomed. His men, sunsick and soul-shaken, followed him into ruin. One by one they fell to disease, betrayal, or despair. Aguirre, once a soldier, became a specter, a man whose hunger consumed everything, even his own daughter. But this is not his story. We drift past him, for he is only a warning, a whisper of what becomes of those who confuse gold with God. Elsewhere, quieter expeditions tried again. Mapmakers etched guesses into parchment. Rivers became golden lines. Mountains bore names never spoken by locals. The land, alive and breathing, was rewritten into fantasy. And yet, the jungle kept its peace. For every footstep it offered mosque, for every shout, a silence deeper than any cathedral. Those who came with reverence, with respect, were touched but not destroyed. Those who came with fire were swallowed. And El Dorado remained untamed, not because it fled, but because it never existed in the way they believed. It was a mirror. Those who looked into the myths saw themselves. Some saw opportunity, some saw destiny, some saw madness. But the gold was never the goal. It was the lure. And the true treasure, the true enigma, was the belief itself. Why did men believe so hard? Why did they walk willingly into death for the glimmer of something unseen? Because, perhaps, they were not chasing gold. They were chasing meaning, and meaning, like mist, cannot be held, only followed, only breathed, only dreamed, where the land begins to melt into water, and the horizon shimmers not from distance, but from the slow breath of the jungle. A river vast enough to hold legends in its depths, wide enough to swallow the footsteps of empires, and patient enough to carry the dream of El Dorado without ever revealing its truth. The Orinoco begins in the mountains of Venezuela, twisting and folding upon itself, flowing more than 2,000 kilometers through wetlands and rainforests, finally embracing the sea. Its waters carry the minerals of forgotten stone and the voices of creatures unseen. But, to the seekers of El Dorado, it was a path, a corridor, a possibility. The river, with its endless branches and hidden coves, resembled a maze drawn by a sleeping god. And it was into this maze that men ventured, chasing whispers. In the late 1500s, Sir Walter Raleigh, the English courtier with a thirst for adventure and immortality, turned his gaze toward the Orinoco. He had read the accounts, heard the rumors there. Beyond the Spanish-held lands, in the unexplored jungles of Guyana, lay the fabled city of gold. Not the old story of the golden man in the lake, but a new incarnation. A city called Manoa, nestled upon the shores of a mythical lake named Raleigh believed it. He wanted to believe it, not just for England's glory, but for his own redemption. He sailed from Trinidad into the Orinoco basin, navigating through thick waters veiled in green. His journals speak of flooded forests, of great ceiba trees whose roots twisted like ancient fingers, of nights where the stars seemed to drip into the river, and the people they told stories. Whether to please the explorers, to delay them, or to pass on old tales, no one can say, but they spoke of a great king, of a golden city hidden beyond the mountains, past waterfalls so high they scraped the sky. Raleigh listened, he wrote. He embellished, and the legend grew. He never found Manoa. He returned to England with words, not treasure. He published the discovery of the large, rich, and beautiful empire of Guyana, a book soaked in wonder, conviction, and crafted allure. In it, he described a land of abundance, ruled by a noble prince, where gold lined the riverbanks and pearls grew in oysters the size of shields. The public was captivated. The court was skeptical. Still, the idea of El Dorado had moved again, its form ever-changing, its core untouchable. But Raleigh was not finished. Years later, aged and weathered, he returned once more to the Orinoco. Political disgrace shadowed him. This final expedition was his last chance to rekindle favor. He sent his son, Wat Raleigh a priver, to press deeper into the basin. It was a mistake. Skirmishes broke out. The Spanish governor of San was killed. Wat Raleigh fell in battle, and a dream of El Dorado dimmed. Sir Walter returned to England empty, mourning, and broken. King James, who had warned against Spanish conflict, ordered his execution. Raleigh died with El Dorado still pulsing in his chest. He had never found it, but he had believed. And in believing, he had become part of the myth himself. The Orinoco remains as it was, broad, mysterious, unsolved. In the early morning, mist clings to its surface like a second river of air. Howler monkeys echo from the canopy. Beneath the water, shadows move, fish perhaps, or something older. The indigenous tribes still navigate its curves. Some speak in quiet tones of ancient cities, swallowed by vines, of spirits that guard sacred places, of lakes that appear on no maps, whose waters are too still, too dark, and always watching. To them, the legend of the Golden City is not fiction. It is memory, but memory kept sacred. Not to be hunted, but honored. Not to be unearthed, but understood. And so, the Orinoco flows on its current eternal, its secrets intact. It is a river of forgetting and remembering. Those who come seeking gold leave with mud. Those who come seeking truth often return with silence. But for those willing to sit on its shores, in the hush between dusk and dawn, a glimmer might be seen. But of something rarer, a story that continues to breathe, carried on the water's skin. And perhaps, in that breath, the real El Dorado still whispers. There is a map, faded now, ink smeared by damp air and time's careless fingers, yet still legible in its ambition. It shows the northern stretch of South America, vast, uncharted, green as a painter's dream, and there, nestled in the heart of mystery, a lake, and beside it, etched in trembling hand, the city Manoa. This map was drawn not by one man, but by many hands, hopes folded into guesses. Over the course of a century, Lake Parimé appeared again and again on European charts, as if to will it into existence. Yet to the people who lived in the Orinoco Basin and the surrounding highlands, this lake was more than ink. It was a spirit, a mirror reminder. Some indigenous groups spoke of a great lake that had once existed but had dried up after a great sorrow. Others said it was hidden, revealed only to those whose hearts were unburdened by greed. And some said nothing, for some places are not spoken of, only remembered. The tale of Lake Parimé gained fervent form through explorers, who returned not with gold, but with stories. Chief among them was the German adventurer Philip von Hutten, who in the early 1540s ventured deep into the Guiana Shield. His journey, though ill-fated, carved new paths into the minds of God. He told of a highland region where a shimmering lake kissed the feet of a golden city, a city with wide avenues and walls that sparkled under the equatorial sun. Hutten did not find it, but he believed he had been close. That belief was enough. Later, Raleigh would add Parimé to his own imagined empire. He'd never saw the lake himself, but the consistency of the reports convinced him. So he placed it boldly on his maps. His book spoke of it as if it were fact. In Europe, that was enough. Scholars debated its dimensions. Kings whispered of its strategic value. Adventurers studied the maps with the intensity of prayer. But if the lake ever existed, it had already retreated beyond the grasp of those who sought to possess it. Modern geographers speculate that what came to be known as Lake Parimé may have been inspired by seasonal in regions like the Rupununi savannas of Guyana, Heavy rains transformed dry grasslands into vast, shimmering lakes. These temporary waters, reflecting sky and tree, can appear endless. To the untrained eye, to the desperate dreamer, such a sight might be mistaken for And yet, the legend persisted. As the centuries turned, more expeditions tried to reach Lake Par. In the 18th century, Charles Marie de la Condamine, a French explorer and mathematician, journeyed through the Amazon and came to doubt the lake's existence. He found no evidence of it. Still, the maps remained. Still, the myth glowed. And in 1835, the Prussian geographer Alexander von Humboldt, a man both romantic and rational, traveled through South America and wrote extensively on the mystery of Parima. He believed the lake was a misinterpretation, a mirage reinforced by repetition. Yet even Humboldt, ever the scientist, could not fully erase its allure, for the human soul, once entangled with myth, does not let go. And the jungle, the eternal stage of these whispered tales, seemed to conspire with legend. It hid lakes behind curtains of mist. It veiled highland valleys with clouds that never lifted. It guarded silence, like a priest guards sacred flame. And so, Lake Parima endured, not in water, but in wonder. Some claim that during the dry season, if you fly over the savannas at the right hour, with the right angle of sun, you can still see the outline of a vanished lake, its contours impressed into the earth like the memory of a long-lost dream. Others say the lake was never real at all, that it was born from need, a need for something perfect, a place untouched by sin or time, a city where every roof shone, where every street led to understanding, a reflection of the world not as it is, but as it might be. El Dorado, by way of Parime, became that dream. It mattered little whether the lake had shores. What mattered was that somewhere, out there, untouched and waiting, was the answer, and if a man could reach it, he would be whole. So the maps remained. They hang now in museums, brown and fragile, their lines slightly warped by the centuries. Yet the ink still dares to suggest that perhaps, just perhaps, there is more to the world than we know. Perhaps Parime was real. Perhaps it still is, hidden, watching, waiting for the kind of eyes that see not just with vision but with hope. Before the conquistadors arrived, before the word El Dorado was ever spoken in a European tongue, there was a people who lived in harmony with the land's rhythms. They did not need legends of cities made of gold. Their world already shimmered, not with conquest, but with connection. They were the dwelling high upon the Altiplano, Cundaboya Senstar, Andean plateau of Colombiata. Muisca thrived in a world of lakes, valleys, and rolling green. The air was thin, and so was the veil between the seen and the unseen. Here the gold was not hoarded, it was released, not bartered, but given, not stolen, but shaped into songs. Gold was for the gods. They called it tequendama, a gift from the earth meant to return to the sacred. The Muisca goldwork remains some of the most spiritually expressive in the ancient world. The Tungesteini votive figures were made with careful ritual, often representing ancestors, deities, or spirits of nature. They were not symbols of wealth. They were conduits, placed into lakes, rivers, and sacred springs. The gold returned to the earth like breath to wind. Each offering carried a purpose: gratitude, remembrance, healing. This was not greed. This was balance. In Muisca cosmology, the world was kept whole through cycles of reciprocity. Humans did not dominate the land. They spoke to it, listened, and offered in return. When a new Zepa rose to leadership, the famed golden ceremony at Lake Guatavita was not an act of display. It was a vow to serve the people, to honor the divine, to begin again. Imagine this scene: dawn breaking through silver mist, a raft carved from reeds, gliding silently across dark waters, the chieftain dusted in gold, light dancing upon his skin like sunrise touching stone. Emeralds and figures of jaguars, owls, and warriors placed around him, each one speaking a prayer older than language. Then he jumps. The surface ripples. The dust dissolves. The vow is made, and the people on the shore breathe together. The world, once more, is in rhythm. But this sacred rite, observed by a culture attuned to meaning, was misunderstood by foreign eyes. The Spanish saw wealth. They did not see vow. They saw opportunity. They did not see offering. And so, the Muisca began to disappear, not in body, but in story. Their rituals were recast as riches. Their lakes became vaults. Their silence, mistaken for ignorance, was merely patience. Even as Spanish records began to document the ceremony of the Golden Man, they twisted it. They took a rite and turned it into myth. The raft became a parade, the lake a treasure chest, and the whisper that once honored the sacred became a roar of ambition. In the centuries that followed, gold seekers came and left. Some tried to drain Lake Guatavita, not with prayer, but with pulleys and plunder. Others blew holes in the walls, hoping to empty it like a cask. They found fragments, thin plates shaped like suns and men, enough to believe, but never enough to satisfy. because the gold was not meant to be found. It was meant to be surrendered. Today, the Muisca legacy endures not in the volume of their monuments, but in the depth of their silence. Their descendants still walk the highlands, still whisper the old names, still leave offerings, though perhaps now more in memory than in ritual. And the gold they left behind still sleeps beneath Guatavita's waters, embedded in mud and myth. Occasionally a diver surfaces with a figure, a small animal, a disc, and for a moment, the story stirs. But always, the lake reclaims its quiet, because the Muisca did not build El Dorado, they embodied it. Not with walls, but with wisdom. Not with gold, but with grace. To them, the city never needed to exist, because the true wealth was never the gold. It was a sacred act of letting go. In the heart of the Amazon basin, where the sun filters down through 1,000 layers of green, where the trees speak in the language of wind and the rain comes like a forgotten hymn, there lie cities, not cities of concrete and angles, but of memory, of earth, of breath. Long before the first European foot disturbed the loam of this vast rain, civilizations bloomed here, quietly, elegantly. Entire networks of raised roads, mound complexes, and engineered soils once stretched across these lands hidden, not by intention, but by the forest's slow embrace. These were not the cities of Western imagination, no spires, no stone walls. Their architecture was the land itself. Elevated platforms for homes, canals to guide water like veins, dark, fertile earth known as terra preta, enriched by generations of knowledge. And in the minds of the seekers of El Dorado, these invisible cities began to coalesce into something tangible, a confirmation of their dream. They believed they were onto something, that the fabled city must lie somewhere beyond the vines, just past the next bend in the river. But what they saw gleaming towers of gold was not what the jungle offered. What it held instead was subtler, softer, wiser. It held cities that understood the forest not as an obstacle, but as a partner. The anthropologist Betty Migos once famously declared that the Amazon was too poor in nutrients to support large-scale civilizations, that any sign of such must have been temporary, anomalous. But time and patient archaeologies tell a different story. In the last decades, squares, grids etched into the ground in places where the forest has been peeled back. Through satellite imagery and LiDAR, the veil has lifted slightly. What was once seen as empty is now revealed as engineered. The Upper Xingu in Brazil, once thought to be pristine wilderness, has revealed networks of causeways, defensive ditches, and communal plazas. Not ruins, but the outline of a people who lived in balance. These were cities not of gold, but of harmony. And perhaps, just perhaps, the legend of El Dorado arose, not from lies or hallucinations, but from echoes. Echoes of a time when human hands shaped the land gently, with wisdom passed from one breath to the next. Imagine, if you will, a clearing where homes made of woven wood and clay stood in circles, their arrangement mirroring the stars, children playing beneath palms, their laughter carried through leaves, women tending gardens not fenced, but open to birds and breeze, fires burning low, songs rising like smoke into the dusk, and beneath it all, the forest, breathing, sheltering, witnessing, growing. Perhaps when early explorers stumbled into these communities, their eyes trained by cities of stone could not comprehend what they saw. To them, these were not cities. There were no gates, no temples with soaring spires. But to the people who lived there, it was more than a city. It was a home woven into the skin of the earth. And when the outsiders brought violence, when disease arrived like a shadow, the cities did not fall in fire. The forest, ever gentle and ever patient, took them back. The leaves wrapped around the roads, the roots folded over the walls, the breath of time exhaled, and silence grew. And with that silence, the legend transformed. The cities became El Dorado, no longer a place of earth and mounds, but a fantasy of golden domes and glowing towers. The deeper the forest grew, the deeper the story rooted. And still today, explorers search. They walk beneath canopies where entire civilizations once gathered, unaware that they tread not toward a city but through it. Because El Dorado may never have been a destination. It may have been a misremembered moment, a glimpse of a people who lived with the land instead of against it, a memory mistaken for a mirage. And in that mistake, a legend was born. But if we slow ourselves, if we listen to the forest's hush, we might feel it still. The cities beneath the leaves, the laughter in the rustling palms, the wisdom buried not in gold, but in soil. And in that gentle awareness, perhaps we come closer to El Dorado than any conquistador ever did. It is said that the jungle forgets no one, not the kings who dreamed of gold, not the poets who wove verses of longing, not even the men who walked into its depths and never walked back out. The jungle remembers in silence. It remembers in roots that twist over forgotten trails, in vines that cover altars once lit by sacred fire. It remembers in bird call and shifting shadow, in the scent of wet earth after rainfall. And it remembers El Dorado not as a place, but as a story. One it has heard many times. The story goes like this. A man with eyes full of hunger enters the forest. In his heart he carries maps, names, numbers. He comes not to listen, but to take, not to witness, but to possess. The forest watches. He walks for days, then weeks. The vines close behind him. The air thickens. The calls of monkeys echo in unfamiliar chords. He begins to see things. Not just hallucinations, though the fever comes, but reflections of his own desire. Cities in the mist, temples in the trees, golden statues rising from the soil. A glimpse of something just ahead. Always just ahead. But the more he walks, the more the jungle changes. The silence grows louder. The trees lean closer. And then he vanishes. Not taken. Not punished. Just absorbed. The jungle does not kill him, it simply remembers, and so the story returns, whispered by the winds, retold by those who find Tresar's a broken blade, a boot with no wearer, a journal damp with secrets. In this way, the jungle does not resist the legend of El Dorado. It becomes it, because the truth is this: the jungle has always known El Dorado, not as a city, but as a rhythm, a breath, a shimmer in the distance that lures men deeper into themselves. It is not cruel, it is not kind. It simply is. And if one listens close, if one allows the hum of insects, the slow drip of water from bromeliads, the rustle of a jaguar slipping through ferns, there is music. A music older than language. A music that sounds remarkably like memory. Some tribes still speak of this, not of El Dorado, but of places that do not wish to be found. They say there are places where time sleeps, where those who enter without permission are gently forgotten, their footprints covered before they cool, their voices swallowed by moss and birdcore, not lost, not punished, just return. The jungle gives what is asked, but not always in the way it is imagined. Those who seek wealth may find silence. Those who seek power may find stillness. But those who seek understanding may begin to hear the story, the real story, of balance, of offering, of a man covered in gold, not because he wished to dazzle, but because he wished to surrender, because he knew that gold was not his. It belonged to the world, to the river, to the sky, to the memory of things larger than any one life. And the jungle, too, wears its gold. Not in coins, but in light. The morning sun catching the wings of butterflies. The glint of raindrops on orchids. The iridescence of beetles crawling over sacred roots. El Dorado has always been here, but not to be found. Only to be remembered, and the jungle, with its green patience, will keep remembering, for as long as a dream survives. There are lakes in South America that never speak. Their surfaces are calm, their colors dark as obsidian, reflecting not only the sky, but something deeper, something older. They do not ripple unless stirred by wind or rain. And yet, beneath their silence, they remember. They remember gold. They remember offerings. They remember names that have not been spoken in generations. And they remember the hands that once reached into them. Not with reverence, but with demand. One such lake is, but it is not alone. Across the highlands and into the lowlands, there are sacred waters hidden in folds of jungle. Tucked into the bones of the Andes stat have held the weight of prayer and the burden of greed. Each lake is a mirror, and each mirror reflects a different part of the legend. After the Spanish drained Guatavita in the 16th century, and again in the 19th, and yet again in the early 20th, they found remnants, small pieces, golden figurines curled in silent poses, discs pressed thin as whispers, beads worn by time, but they did not find the city. They never would. Because these offerings were never a clue, they were a conclusion. Each one had already served its purpose. They were not placed for discovery. They were surrendered. Even now, Guatavita's waters sometimes return a gift. A storm will churn its floor. A diver may glimpse a glint. A fisherman might catch a reflection, not his own. They are memories. The lakes beneath the Andes do not speak in words, but if one sits beside them long enough, a sensation may arise, not sound, but awareness. As if something is breathing beneath the surface. Not a monster, not a ghost, but an idea. Not as city, not as man, but as presence. In 1969, a remarkable artifact was pulled from a cave nearby. It was a golden raft, small, no longer than a hand crafted by the Muisca in astonishing detail. Upon it stood a figure, surrounded by attendants gliding across water in frozen procession. It was the Golden Man, the Zipa court midst, a story sculpted in metal. This was no myth, this was memory. Now housed in the Museo del Oro, the golden raft gleams under glass. Visitors lean in, their reflections flickering across its surface. Many speak of El Dorado as fantasy. And yet, there it is. Not the city, not the gold, but the gesture, the ritual, the surrender. It is not the only such artifact. Scattered throughout the Andes, museums and private collections hold pieces of a worldview nearly for pendants, discs etched with suns and birds and eyes that never close. Each one whispers. Each one reminds us that gold was never the story, it was the ink. And water the lakes, the rivers, the sacred springs, was the parchment. Together, they told a tale, not of wealth, but of balance, of returning what was never ours. Some say that even now, In hidden lakes known only to a few, offerings are still made, quietly, not to summon wealth, but to maintain silence, to keep the legend whole. The waters accept, the waters remember. And El Dorado, that golden name, does not sleep in the jungle. It sleeps beneath the surface. What? Breathing, waiting for those who do not come with shovels or sonar, but with stillness and a willingness to listen to what cannot be spoken. Because the deepest echoes do not rise in shouts, they rise in reflection. And when the water's perfectly still, when the clouds drift overhead like forgotten dreams, the lake may return your gaze. And in that gaze, you may see a glimmer, not of treasure, but of truth. In an age before satellites and digital surveys, maps were acts of imagination. They were not merely depictions of coastlines or coordinates, but canvases for longing, spaces for myth, borders drawn not just in ink, but in desire. And few places were adorned with such desire as the lands that held El Dorado. To chart South America in the 16th and 17th centuries was to wrestle with illusion. Dense jungles obscured even the sun. Rivers meandered for hundreds of miles, their origins lost in mist. Mountains appeared suddenly, blocking progress and reshaping belief. And in this wilderness, cartographers placed their hopes. They placed El Dorado. Sometimes it was called Manoa, sometimes it appeared beside Lake Paraná, sometimes it floated farther west, deep into Peru, or even north, brushing the Guiana. But always it was there, its position shifting like a constellation observed from a turning world. On maps drawn by men who had never set foot in these forests, El Dorado took form as a precise dot, a name underlined in gold. Some maps were cautious, placing the city with a question mark. Others were bold, drawing roads toward it, rivers flowing from it, pathways illuminated by imagined discoveries. They charted the unknown, not with skepticism, but with yearning. The Dutch cartographer Jodocus Hondius in 1598 included El Dorado in his America map. Nestled against a vast inland lake, his rendering is both meticulous and romantic, a geography of both earth and dream. So too did the famed Mercator, whose legacy shapes how we view the world even today. In his 1625 map of South America, El Dorado appears prominently, not hidden in the forest but offered plainly, like an invitation. To include it was not simply an error, it was a gesture, a belief that something must exist beyond the known, a willingness to let myth shape measurement. And through their maps, these men became cartographers not just of land but of longing. Yet even as knowledge expanded, as explorers returned with more accurate data and the blank spaces shrank, El Dorado refused to disappear. It lingered, it adjusted, it adapted. Even in the 18th and 19th centuries, when skepticism began to take root, the city remained sometimes labeled as former site or legendary location. But it was still there, still breathing on paper, still glowing on parchment, still beckoning, for it had transcended geography. It had become metaphor, the dream of a better place, a hidden world where all was abundance, all was light. And so the cartographers, knowingly or not, mapped a desire as old as the human spirit, to find paradise, to believe that somewhere, over some final hill, behind some forgotten waterfall, there exists a place untouched by sorrow, a place where gold is not hoarded, but flows like river water, where the air carries the scent of understanding, where history sleeps not in ruins, but in radiance. Today, these maps are preserved in libraries and museums. Their paper is fragile, their lines faded, but their dreams endure. We study them not just to learn where men once thought cities lay, but to glimpse the shape of their imaginations, to witness how the legend of El Dorado, though never found, shaped the very way we saw the world, and perhaps still shapes it. For even now, in a digital age of precision and pixels, there remains a part of us that longs for the that seeks the shimmer beyond the reach of satellites, that believes, quietly, that somewhere still hidden, something golden waits, not to be claimed, but to be understood. The legend of El Dorado did not remain trapped within jungle vines or explorers' journals. It climbed higher, into courts, into the chambers of kings, into the minds of monarchs who sat far from the equator, their thrones carved from oak and velvet, yet their dreams drenched in golden sunlight. El Dorado reached Europe not as rumor, but as revelation, and it changed everything. In Spain, where the New World had already poured rivers of silver into the royal treasury, the idea of a golden city was not just exciting, it was intoxicating. The empire hungered for more, for one last source of endless wealth, a land not of silver mines and broken stones, but of opulent streets, golden fountains, temples bathed in sunlight. And so they funded expeditions, and so they waited. But it wasn't only Spain. France dreamed of El Dorado too, as did Portugal, and England, particularly England, whose rivalry with Spain burned bright beneath banners and sails. When Sir Walter Raleigh returned from his voyage along the Orinoco, he carried with him no bars of gold, no relics, no jewels, but he carried something far more valuable to the court of Queen Elizabeth I, A story of a vast empire untouched by Spain, of a place so rich in gold that the rivers carried flakes of it downstream, of Manoa city grander than any in Europe, built on the shores of a lake larger than all of Wales. He spoke with conviction, with flourish, with longing, and they believed him, because he believed himself. Queen Elizabeth saw in Raleigh not just an adventurer, but a messenger, a knight errant for the New World. And El Dorado became, for a moment, a matter not of fantasy but of state. Raleigh's words were copied, printed, read by scholars and sailors, ministers and merchants. His accounts lit fires in minds across Europe, fires of possibility, of conquest, of salvation. For some, El Dorado meant wealth. For others, it meant escape, a place to start again, to rise anew. Even when Raleigh's expedition was met with doubt, even when his failure became visible, the legend did not diminish. If anything, it grew, because El Dorado had become too large to fail. It no longer mattered whether Raleigh had seen Manoa. It mattered that he had made others see it. The fever touched France as well. Explorers pushed inland from their coastal colonies, seeking rumors, rivers, ruins. Some spoke of highland cities glimpsed from afar. Others described stone roads swallowed by vines. Always the same refrain: we were close. In Portugal, the dream coiled through the Amazon, where Jesuits ventured deeper than maps permitted. They did not all seek gold, but, even among the pious, the legend had a quiet allure, a golden kingdom hidden from sin, perhaps, a second Eden. But it was not only the kings and queens who dreamed. Artists painted lush visions of jungle cities. Playwrights spoke of golden kings in distant lands. Children heard the name El Dorado and whispered it like a spell. It was everywhere and it was nowhere, for El Dorado had become a vessel, a reflection of whatever the viewer most desired. To the ambitious, it was wealth. To the disillusioned, it was purity. To the hunted, it was sanctuary. And so, even in absence, it remained real, and the fever spread not through disease but through language, through the turning of pages, through the drawing of maps, through the dreams of monarchs who ruled over frozen islands and gray skies, but whose hearts burned for something golden, a place they could never reach, but would never stop imagining. Even today, the myth lingers in the corridors of power, not as a literal city, but as an echo, a reminder that there will always be something just beyond the edge of knowledge, a place that, if only we could find it, would solve everything. El Dorado, the cure for the unknown. And in that whisper, kings and emperors, presidents and prophets still hear the same call. Not because it is real, but because it must be. There is a city made not of stone, nor of gold, but of echoes. Its name drifts through centuries, Manoa. To some it was the same as El Dorado. To others, it was its heart, its sacred center. A city built beside a vast and mythic Lake Parime, where towers shimmered in the sun and streets flowed with wealth not meant for human hands. Manoa was not whispered in fear. It was spoken with it. It is said to have stood on water's edge, its buildings shaped like sunlight and flame, where birds of emerald feathers flew without fear, and the nights glowed with an eternal, golden twilight. But no one ever saw it, and yet everyone described it. In the late 16th century, tales of Manoa rippled outward from Venezuela and Guyana, told by the mouths of captured guides, survivors of failed expeditions, and those who returned from the forest with gold-flecked eyes but empty hands. They described a city whose riches and Cusco, a kingdom so abundant that the people had no need to defend their wealth because no one dared steal it. A place where gold was so common it was walked upon, not hoarded, not weighed, but lived. The chroniclers believed it, for it suited their hunger. The kings believed it, for it suited their hope. And the people believed it, for it gave shape to dreams. But what was Manoa? Was it a memory, a misheard word, a place that once was, or never was? Perhaps Manoa was built not from gold, but from longing, a longing for something untouched, a sanctuary beyond corruption, a city where the world's disorder reversed itself, where value lay not in conquest, but in balance. The Jesuits who wandered deep into the continent sometimes wrote of tribes who spoke of a great inland city that no longer welcomed outsiders, a place hidden beyond rivers that turned back on themselves, a place protected not by walls, but by forgetting. One account tells of a village that claimed its ancestors had once lived in a great city of light, but fled when the people stopped offering gold to the gods and began keeping it for themselves. The city, they said, was swallowed by the jungle as punishment. Its towers crumbled to root, its streets to soil, and now it exists only in the hearts of those who remember. These stories, dismissed by many, are kept in fragile letters stored in distant libraries, and yet there is something in them that refuses to die. Because even now, the name Manoa holds power. It is found in poetry, in film, in the names of towns across the Americas, echoes of a city no one has seen. It has become a mirror, and in that mirror, we glimpse ourselves, our desires, our regrets, our unrelenting need to believe that somewhere, A place exists that is not broken, that is not bruised by time or war or greed. A place we might have known once in another life. A golden city, not of metal, but of memory. Not of wealth, but of wisdom. And so, the search for Manoa never ends. It migrates from explorer to artist, from prince to pilgrim. It calls to the part of us that remembers the world before loss, the world before silence, the world where light did not blind, but healed. Manoa is that world, and when we dream of it, we are not fools. We are witnesses. Witnesses to a city that perhaps never was, but always is. There is a myth within the myth, that those who sought El Dorado perished because of cruelty of the forests, of the gods, of fate. But perhaps the truth is stranger still. Perhaps they were spared, for the jungle does not hate, it does not punish, it transforms. It erases only what cannot remain. And in this slow green mercy it returned men to the earth when they could no longer carry their greed. In the thickest parts of the Amazon, beyond where the rivers fork like lightning carved into soil, stories persist told by firesides and carried through generations. Stories of white-skinned wanderers who came into the forest centuries ago, never to return. But not because they died, because they forgot what they came for. In some tales, they became part of the forest itself. Their armor rusted into moss, their swords fed the vines, their language faded, replaced by the calls of birds and the rhythm of rain. Some say they found the city not of gold, but of peace, a place so unlike what they imagined that they no longer recognized themselves. They stayed, they laid down their maps, they wept without knowing why, and then they disappeared, not into death, but into belonging. The jungle's mercy is not gentle in the way of lullabies. It is deeper, it is absolute. It takes the noise from your soul and replaces it with silence. It takes your questions and answers them with wind. It does not argue, it does not offer bargains. It offers immersion, and that is what El Dorado may have always been. A place that removes the burden of seeking, a place where desire is dissolved, where gold loses its name, and where men no longer try to be more than they are. There is an old Quechua word, sumakosea phrase, that means a good life, or more deeply, living in harmony. It is not found in coins. It is not found in conquest. It is found in being fully, quietly, and the jungle, in its vast unknowability, understands this. It does not care for thrones or kingdoms. It lets the strangler fig grow around the forgotten temple. It lets the tree frog sing where once war drums beat. It lets the roots consume the past, not in rage, but in rhythm. To walk into this green vastness with ambition is to be to walk in with reverence is to be shown something different. Not El Dorado, but you. Your reflection, stripped of titles and dreams, just breath, just skin, just soul. That is why no one finds El Dorado, because the very act of searching hides it. It appears only when you have nothing left to ask, only when the gold inside you weighs more than the gold you seek, only when you are still enough to see the shimmering not on leaves or lakes but within. And so, the jungle waits, not with traps, not with punishment, but with mercy, green, endless, forgiving. And when the last maps are burned, when the last expedition ends in silence, the jungle will still be there, breathing, remembering, and perhaps still offering El Dorado to those who no longer seek it. There is a river in Colombia called Cano Crystals. To those who see it only in pictures, it might seem like illusion, a painting more than a place, but it is real. A river of 5 colors, they say, a river that blooms in the months when the rains calm and the light strikes just so. A rare aquatic plant known as Macarenia clavigera transforms the water's floor into a glowing canvas of red, yellow, green, blue, and black. From above, the river becomes a ribbon of living light. It is not El Dorado, and yet it is, because Cano Crystals reflects what the seekers of El Dorado were always chasing, something beautiful enough to still the soul, something too delicate to be held, something that vanishes when grasped but appears when simply observed. The indigenous peoples of the De La Macarena region knew this river long before maps caught its flow. They called it the river that escaped from paradise, not because it was forbidden, but because it was rare, elusive, living, and like El Dorado, it cannot be possessed. There is no treasure to take, only a moment to witness, a quiet shimmer that confirms beauty exists and that it is not ours to keep. When the conquistadors passed nearby, they did not see Cano Crystals. They saw trees and mud, an endless trail. They walked past the miracle, because their eyes were turned elsewhere toward a golden city that did not exist in space, but in spirit. How many wonders have we passed because we expected them to look like myths? How many silent gifts have we missed, rushing forward, seeking what was never promised? The river, like the legend, does not ask to be found. It reveals itself to the patient, to those who walk not with hunger, but with stillness. And in that stillness, the world becomes luminous. Many who have visited Cano Crystals speak not of excitement, but of peace. They do not scream at its beauty, they fall silent before it. They do not leap to photograph it, they kneel beside it. And in that reverence, the story of El Dorado breathes in you. Because perhaps the Golden City was never a city, perhaps it was a feeling. The moment when the air becomes soft, and the light touches you gently, and the noise in your chest quiets like a drum settling to rest. The moment when you realize you are no longer chasing anything. You are simply here, breathing, witnessing, alive. El Dorado, then, is not lost. It appears whenever we cease to demand it. Whenever we allow the river to reflect us as we are not kings, not seekers, not conquest but beings made of dust and dreaming. The jungle knows this. The river knows this. And the legend of El Dorado continues not because of gold but because it speaks to something deeper. A yearning for wholeness, for home, for beauty we cannot buy, only notice. So come, sit beside the river that reflects the sky. Let the colors wrap around your thoughts. Let your ambitions drift downstream. And know that in this moment, in this breath, you are closer to El Dorado than any who ever lifted a sword. In every legend, there is a moment when belief turns brittle, when the shimmer becomes a glare, when the dream begins to crack beneath the weight of desire. El Dorado, for all its beauty, carried a shadow. Not one cast by jungle or mountain, but by man. A shadow born of misunderstanding, and magnified by greed. What began as a sacred rita man dusted in gold, offering himself to the divine, was twisted. The story became tangled in translation. What the Muisca practiced with reverence, the Europeans interpreted as what was a gesture of humility became an image of unimaginable wealth. The golden man became a golden city. The city became a promise. The promise became a lie. But no one questioned it because the lie was useful. It gave purpose to expeditions. It gave kings something to fund. It gave adventurers something to chase. It gave broken men something to believe in. And so, the lie grew. Like moss over truth, the rivers were mapped, not for their beauty, but for what they might conceal. The mountains were climbed, not in awe, but in anticipation. And when the cities were not found, when the gold did not gleam beneath the leaves, still the lie persisted, because to admit it was false was to face the emptiness within. Men had died for it, nations had poured fortunes into it, lives had been consumed. How could it not be real? So instead of letting the myth go, they moved it farther into the jungle, deeper into the highlands, across new borders and into new lands. The city of gold was always just over the next hill, always behind the next bend in the river, always close, but never here. Even today, the name El Dorado adorns airports, towns, schools. It is spoken with reverence, with irony, with hope, and often with no awareness of the sacredness it once held. The golden man is forgotten, the ceremony erased. Only the illusion remains. But illusions, when long believed, gain power. They shape decisions. They guide ships. They justify violence. El Dorado became more than a lie. It became a mirror for colonial ambition. A justification for taking, for conquering, for burning. The Spanish conquistadors who sought it were not evil caricatures. They were men flawed, hungry, lost. They wanted something more, and so they followed a dream. But in doing so, they passed through villages they could not understand, destroyed rituals they did not respect, and silenced voices they could not hear. All in the name of a myth born from a mistranslation, a golden lie. Yet even in this shadow, something tender remains. Because the legend also reveals our hunger for meaning, our ache for wonder, our desire to believe that something miraculous lies hidden, waiting for us. And in that ache, there is still a kind of beauty, a kind of truth. For the greatest myths are not those that deceive, but those that reveal. Not what is real, but what is longed for. And perhaps El Dorado, in all its shimmering falseness, tells us more about ourselves than any true city ever could. It tells us that we want to believe in redemption, that we want to think there is a place where all things are whole, where no one suffers, where gold is not currency, but light. And if that place never existed, perhaps it should have, and perhaps, in believing in it, we become a little more able to build it not in the jungle, but in our lives, not with gold, but with grace. Long before pen met paper, before the first maps were inked with dreams and distance, there was another way of recording truth. The forests, not with words, but with patterns, with presence, with silence. The people who lived among the rivers and roots knew how to read this language. It was written in the curve of a fern, in the way vines leaned, in the rhythm of animal calls before rain. To walk the jungle was to enter a library of the sacred, where each leaf carried a line of meaning, and each stone told stories, if one knew how to listen. The forest, after all, speaks in time, and time speaks in circles. This is a truth the Muisca knew. The countless nations whose names drift like smoke across forgotten maps, whose languages are not lost, but sleeping in the Western world. Gold was permanence. But in the language of the forest, gold was a moment, a flicker of sun on water, a butterfly's wing, a glint of dew before dawn. And in this language soft cyclical living El Dorado never referred to wealth. It referred to a state of being, to balance, to beauty, to the art of enough. The golden man of the Muisca was not crowned because of what he possessed, but because of what he gave. Each speck of dust on his skin was a prayer. Each emerald dropped into Guatavita a vow. The ceremony was not for spectacle. It was for memory, to remind the people and the land that leadership was service, that power must be cleansed before it can be trusted, that the earth does not yield gold for vanity but for reverence. We have forgotten how to speak this way. Our ears tuned to noise, our eyes distracted by glare. But the forest has not forgotten. Its language still murmurs in the rustle of dry palms, in the low hum of cicadas at dusk, in the breath between raindrops, and for those who stop, who quiet the hunt, who leave the compass behind. A sentence might be heard, a phrase, a story, not written on parchment, but growing in moss, not recorded in ink, but in the flight of birds across an open canopy, not declared but felt. It says, you are not apart from this, you are of it. And in that message lies the true El Dorado, not as myth, but as understanding, the understanding that wealth is not in what can be carried, but in what can be honored, not in what endures, but in what returns. So let the maps fade. Let the coins rust, let the towers crumble back to loom, and listen instead to the language of leaves, the oldest tongue on earth, and the only one that still remembers the golden truth. They came in armor, they came in rags, they came with parchments inked in ambition, and hearts bruised by longing. The pilgrims of El Dorado. They were not merely soldiers or scouts, not only explorers or emissaries. They were pilgrims, though they may not have called themselves that. Each carried a private yearning, a wound they hoped to mend with wonder, a hollowness they thought gold could fill. The path they walked was not marked by holy stones or sacred relics. It was carved through jungle vines, through endless mud, through rivers with no end and sky with no stars. They walked deeper, past reason, past maps, past what the world could explain. And with each step, the myth grew stronger. The harder the journey, the more certain they became that El Dorado must lie ahead. Because surely, suffering demands a reward. Surely, the jungle would not swallow them, unless it were guarding something divine. This is the cruel magic of longing. It can make illusions feel like destiny. Among these pilgrims were men like Pedro de and Lope de Aguirre, whose expedition along the Amazon unraveled like silk and fire. Ursua, noble in bearing, so with order. Aguirre, twisted by paranoia, sought immortality. Together they marched with hundred soldiers, slaves, women, children to the green unknown. But the jungle has no path for conquest. It has only surrender. Soon the vines tore their clothes. The insects clouded their breath. The heat sang in their bones. And when food dwindled and maps failed, madness grew. Aguirre seized command. He called himself Wrath of God. He declared war on the very world. And still, he searched for El Dorado. It had to exist. Because if it didn't, then the suffering meant nothing. Then the blood was just blood. Then the jungle had won. But El Dorado is not won. It is only revealed, and not to those who demand it, only to those who no longer need it. Aguirre died alone, haunted, but he was not the only one. From Europe, they continued to come drawn not just by promise, but by silence. For every man who marched into the jungle hoping for riches, there was another fleeing something. Debt, disgrace, disillusionment. To them, El Dorado was not just a city. It was escape. The Golden City became a final prayer for those whose lives had grown too loud. A hush at the end of history. And though none found it, the journey itself became a kind of devotion. A pilgrimage, not of saints, but of shadows. Even now, the same pattern persists. Modern seekers enter the jungle not with swords, but with sensors. With drones, with scanners, with artificial intelligence. They map the land from space. They drain its memory with data. And still, the city remains unspoken. Because the jungle is not a puzzle to be solved. It is a prayer to be heard. And El Dorado is not at the end of a road. It is the space between footfalls, the silence after the last question, the shimmer at the edge of acceptance. Perhaps the pilgrims were not wrong to search, but they searched outward when the city was always inward, a golden sanctuary beneath the ribs, a light flickering behind the eyes, not a destination but a return. And so they walked, and still we walk, pilgrims of the impossible, drawn by a dream we can never hold, but which holds us always. There are stories that end, and there are stories that sleep. But the legend of El Dorado, it neither ends nor rests. It drifts like mist over the Orinoco, like gold dust in dark water, like memory through generations. Centuries have passed since the first conquistador carved the name of El Dorado into bark or bone, since kings pressed their signets onto commissions with trembling anticipation, since entire fleets set sail not for war, but for wonder. And yet, the dream remains. It has outlived empires. It has outlasted maps. It has survived silence. Because it lives not in the jungle, but in us. The story continues to surface, not in treasure chests or stone gates, but in every human whisper that begins with what if. What if there really was a golden city? What if we've just been looking in the wrong place? What if it's not gone, but hidden? What if the next expedition, the next discovery, the next glimmer in the dark, unfolds the truth? Modern archaeologists, though grounded in data and discipline, sometimes speak with wonder. Remote sensing technology has revealed traces of long-lost settlements beneath the canopy. Perfect geometric lines where no one expected design. Causeways that vanish into jungle. Mounds that once held fire and ceremony. And so, some ask again, was there a city? Maybe not of gold but of meaning. Not El Dorado as fable, but as fragment. A place that whispered so loudly in its time that the echo still moves us. Perhaps it is not a question of yes or no, but a question of listening. Because the legend doesn't need to be true. It only needs to be heard, and it is still being heard. In classrooms where children learn of explorers and empires and ask where the treasure went. In books where El Dorado becomes a metaphor of desire, of beauty, of the unattainable. In films and music where the golden city rises again and again, luminous in the mind. In villages where elders tell tales by firelight not to teach geography, but to teach wonder. And in quiet moments when a traveler looks across a misty valley, heart stilled by something he cannot name. That is where El Dorado lives. In the glint of an idea, in the shimmer of a hope, in the flicker of a dream that refuses to die. It has changed form, as all living myths do, but it has not disappeared. It walks beside us. It whispers not follow me, but remember what it means to search without needing to find, to walk without owning, to believe without proof, and perhaps to love a story not because it is real, but because it reminds you that somewhere inside your breath, inside your bones, there is still a golden city, still waiting, still shining, still yours. Not to claim, but to carry. There comes a moment in every great pursuit when the footsteps slow, when the maps fade, when the questions turn inward, when the seeker, wearied by the long road and the long silence, realizes they have crossed not a continent, but a threshold. This is the silence after the search. It is not empty. It is not defeat. It is the breath that follows longing. And for those who sought El Dorado, the city that shimmered in myth, that beckoned from beyond rivers, beyond reason, this silence has a particular texture. Soft, heavy, golden, still, but in a different way. It begins with the laying down of tools. The sword is sheathed. The spade is dropped. The parchment, once creased with obsession, is folded away. And in that stillness, something shifts. The jungle no longer seems hostile, only vast. The birds no longer seem mocking, only free. And the river, which once taunted with its curves and shadows, becomes a mirror. One by one, the images we carried of El Dorado, gleaming towers, golden walls, fountains of precious stones melt into something simpler. A man on a raft, covered in dust, leaping into sacred water. Only renewal, no conquest, only offering. The silence after the search is when the legend becomes clear, not as a map, but as a meditation. We see then that El Dorado was never about gold. It was about devotion, about the sacredness of giving, about the mystery of what lies just beyond understanding and the grace of not needing to grasp it. In this stillness, those who truly listen may begin to understand what the Muisca knew all along, that to live well is to live in rhythm with the unseen, that to lead is to surrender, that wealth lies not in possession, but in release. And so the silence becomes not a void, but a sanctuary, a place where no one speaks because everything is already said. The jungle, once sought to be subdued, becomes a teacher. Its vines are not barriers, but threads. Its roots not traps, but stories. And the gold, it is everywhere now. In the slant of light through branches, in the curve of a fallen leaf, in the quiet breath of the seeker. Now still, perhaps this is the final gift of El Dorado. Not the myth, not the treasure, but the silence it leaves behind. A silence deep enough to hold the truth that some things are not meant to be found. Only felt, only followed, only remembered. And so the seeker becomes something else. Not a conqueror, not a pilgrim, but a witness to beauty, to longing, to the golden hush of letting go. At the end of every journey lies a question. Not what did I find, but who have I become? The path to El Dorado was never truly about the city. It was a mirror held up to centuries of longing, to hearts that wandered through jungles, not just of trees, but of the self. We have followed rivers through memory. We have climbed mountains made of myth. We have knelt beside sacred lakes, peering into waters so dark they reflect not the sky above, but the soul beneath. And now, as the sun begins to set upon this long, golden dream, one truth glows in the fading light. El Dorado was never lost. Because El Dorado was never a place, it was a possibility buried not in earth, but in us. The golden man who leaped into the lake was not declaring power. He was releasing it. He did not wear gold to rule. He wore it to remind this people and himself that leadership is not about possession. It is about presence. That true value lies not in what we hold, but in what we are willing to let go of. The jungle knew this, the lakes knew this, the Muisca knew this. And now, Perhaps we remembered that El Dorado is not found on maps. It is found in moments. Moments of quiet, of listening without needing to answer, of seeing beauty and not needing to own it. It lives in the breath we take before we speak, in the choice to honor instead of demand, in the decision to walk a little more slowly, to watch, to wonder. It lives in kindness, in reverence, in silence. That is the Golden City. And it has always been waiting, not in Colombia or Venezuela, not in legend or ink, but in your chest, in the soft, hidden chambers of your longing. It is not guarded by warriors, but by your own expectations. It will not open for ambition. It opens only when you stop searching, only when you sit beside the river, in the hush between stars, and say, I am here, not to take, not to prove, but simply to be. And in that stillness, you will hear it, a whisper, the golden hush of the world remembering itself. El Dorado, not a city, a returning, a light that has always lived in you, waiting. And now, fellow dreamer, as the golden river fades behind your eyes, and the last echoes of the jungle melt into quiet, let the hush of El Dorado settle softly over your thoughts. Let your breath slow, your heart ease, your spirit rest. If this journey through myth and memory has touched something within you, if you felt the shimmer behind the legend, let your presence be known through a gentle light, and join our circle of nightbound wanders by subscribing, so that together we may continue to drift through the forgotten corners of time. Tell us, if your heart still wakes, from where in the world you've listened tonight. Let your voice join the soft chorus of dreamers beneath the same white sky. And now, close your eyes, let the gold dissolve, and slip into sleep, wrapped in the whisper of legends. The city is not lost, it is within. Good night, traveler. Good night.